Thank you so much, Claudio, and thank you for your insights. I'm going to go ahead and ask the panel to come up. And as they're getting situated, I'd urge you to take a look at the paper that's on your table, another report that we've issued from a thinkers meeting we had on ESSA earlier this year. And I think it's important to think about the policies that we're talking about, but Claudio highlights the systemic change and what does that take in his comments. From our thinkers meeting of national experts, we didn't really get into what is the end size of the different demographics we're going to meet, or what are the tests we're going to do. Our national experts talked about, does a state have a vision? Does a state have leadership? Does a state have stakeholder engagement? Do they really know how they're going to implement it? And what does continuous improvement mean in that state? Our national thinkers that we assembled in a room, locked them in there, said we're not going to say what you say, we're just going to write a paper off your ideas so you don't have to be attributed to it. These are the things that worried them the most about ESSA implementation, which is why I'm really excited to have this star-studded panel of experts who are going to help Claudio unpack some of this. First, we have Tony Evers, who is here with us from Wisconsin. Tony is one of the two chiefs that I talked about who won re-election. He just won re-election in April and is a third-term now member sitting in a statewide elected seat in Wisconsin. We have Kirsten Baszler, who is the other chief who won re-election out of those 6 in the last 8 months. And Kirsten is the state superintendent in North Dakota and was elected first in 2013 and then again just recently. And we're also excited to have Carissa Moffett-Miller with us. Carissa is the Deputy Executive Director of the Council of Chief State School Officers, and before that was working in the Idaho Department of Education. These 3 have been at the forefront since the day ESSA passed Congress and trying to figure out what states can do, what they should do, and negotiating and discussing and trying to collaborate with the U.S. Department of Education. So please join me in welcoming these 3 and Claudio Sanchez for our next plenary discussion.
Thank you, Jeremy. We're going to forego the bios. You've all got them in your program. We just want to jump into this. And I'm going to ask our panelists if you have any opening comments to make. This is your chance. And I hope we can be on first-name terms here. I mean, it's just between us, right? So, right. So, any opening comments from any one of you?
Well, I'll just jump in. I have to say that the passing of ESSA has been a real milestone. But
Can anybody hear? No.
Well, everything I said was highly intelligent. Are we here?
We're still not hearing Tony.
Well, I can start. So yes, we've been here since the beginning of ESSA, but the majority of us, all of us on the stage, have been here for many, many years before that. We were here with NCLB. Before I became state superintendent, I spent 24 years in the classrooms as a teacher and a vice principal and a leader as a local school board member. And so we've suffered through that. And we are now at a new dawn, a new era. But even more so, a year ago we were talking about planning for ESSA. And we were all having conversations about what it would entail, what the expectations would be, what would be the specifics of the rules and regulations. And you fast forward to today, and now we're talking about implementation. And I think that's a critical piece that some educators, in my career at least, have forgotten about. The plan, the writing of the plan was the important piece, and then you set school districts and educators off to do good work and hope they did well. And I think that there is another level of expectation from us as educational leaders, as state leaders, as policymakers, is that we make sure that we are following through on a process of continuous improvement ourselves and making sure that the implementation goes as well as the planning, and we put as much energy and support into the implementation in our classrooms and our school districts across the state as we did in the planning and the writing of it.
I'll try again. No?
Yes.
There we go. Anyway, I'm going to take off something you said, Claudio, to begin with. The change from a more robust federal presence. And a civil rights leader in our state of Wisconsin said, right after President Obama signed the law, he said, he tweeted something out, he's a friend of mine, he said, and he's a little bit older than me, but he said, you know, I remember what states' rights looked like, and that wasn't so hot. We can't go back there. So I think that's something that's really important to us as we think about what we're going to do in our states with this newfound authority, to make sure that we don't abandon the civil rights work of the 50s and 60s.
Carissa? any opening?
Claudio, I would just say that when we think about the law in and of itself, states should walk into this with a vision for what they want for their education system, and ESSA is a part of that. There is a whole wider array of things that states can and should do, and ESSA is one part of that, but it's the wider vision that I think we'll get into today.
You know, one question that has lingered, as far as I'm concerned, about this whole question of federal-state relationship is whether Washington's control, quote-unquote control, of public education is either real or perceived. Is it real or is it perceived, and are we rid of it? Anybody?
Yeah, I think it's real. I mean, certainly in our state, it's hundreds of millions of dollars real. But in turn, if you look at ESSA, the input side's still the same. Tests are still required in all those grades. The lowest performing schools still need to be identified. I would say if, not that states wouldn't necessarily do that, but the input side is there, and that hasn't changed and hasn't changed for some time.
I would agree. It's very real. Whether we can say we've regained state control, we've certainly regained a lot of flexibility and some more opportunities. We hope as we see the ESSA plans and their approval. But I think the expectation should be the same. The federal government does have that role and that responsibility to have expectations for all students, and all means all. But the way that we get there must be different. And we've worked long and hard for the last 25 years to bring back some of that local control to our states. But we talk a lot about local control, we talk a lot about flexibility, but we also in that same breath need to talk about not only the increased flexibility, but the increased responsibility that brings with it. And we talk about, and that needs to be essentially part of the conversation. Unless we as states can step up and be the leaders that we've said we can be for our students in our state, that flexibility and that local sense to our schools is going to disappear as quickly as we got it.
Well, here's one huge expectation: innovation. Okay, so you're all now free from federal or bureaucratic oversight, one layer upon the other. Innovation in this country has been an enormous problem. Charters used to be supposed to be the laboratory of innovation, which is way back when L. Shanker was supportive of it. He said, yeah, this is the R&D of public education. We have not seen this, and the godfather of charter schools, Ted Koldery up in Minnesota, has said, the last thing that I see happening in charter schools or public schools in general is innovation. How does that change under ESSA? Is ESSA going to release some kind of new degree of, some new energy to really begin to try things that we've never tried before, but that have an enormous amount of promise?
I'll just jump in there. I think it's probably, I don't agree with Ted that public schools don't innovate. In fact, I get chills on my spine every time I hear our Secretary of Education talk about public schools as one size fits all. Over here, it's all innovation. Here's where I come down on innovation. It rests locally. We no longer have to rely on the federal government to tell us that there's 4 types of innovation, especially when all 4 of those types have failed. And so I think that is the difference with ESSA, and it's the outcome difference. And that is when we talk about school improvement, we are going to rely on local schools and local school districts to craft their own solutions with their own communities. That's where the rubber hits the road. Now that may give people willies that's not strong enough. In fact, we're having some people have the willies in Wisconsin about that issue. But the fact of the matter is, the top-down piece from either Washington, D.C. or Madison, Wisconsin, hasn't worked. Whether it's government, how we change governance, how we change other things. We need to engage local communities to solve local problems.
This is an issue that I'm extremely passionate about, and North Dakota has made some recent significant gains. So to innovate, we believe that our schools, each and every one of our schools in North Dakota has the opportunity to innovate given the right conditions. So I'd like to give a shout out to Senator Shively and Representative Owens, who are with me here today. They passed Senate Bill 2186 this last session that allows a public school to essentially request a waiver from the state superintendent to any administrative rule or century code that stands in their way of being innovative. It has to be a plan that is solving a problem that causes an improvement for our students, and it is called our Innovative Education Bill. And we believe that our school districts will be able to come up with their plans that are meeting their needs of their students, and then those plans can be scaled out and replicated across our state. So I believe that our schools shouldn't be confined. Our expectations should be succinct and highly rigorous, but our school districts do have the ability to innovate with their teacher support.
And I want Carissa to
Yeah,
chime
so
in.
Claudia, I would just say there's a couple of things that I think might inspire that within the overarching law. The school quality indicators, we're seeing some of the states that have school climate surveys, which then will inspire kinds of conversations about how do you change that climate, how do you address the climate, that we haven't seen those in systems before. There's also the innovative assessment pilot that's written into the law that is an opportunity for states. New Hampshire, I think, is here, and it's modeled after what they've done with their PACE program there for competency-based education. So I think there's some nuance in the law that allows for it to be taken a couple of steps into innovation.
I was dying to hear more of a specific example of innovation. Anybody have one?
I do. And actually, a superintendent from Bismarck said, I think a lot of the things that constrain and restrict many of our schools are either local policy, state policy, and then, of course, the federal accountability does play a role as well. But the superintendent of the specific example, he says it best. With the release of that, with the release of our Senate Bill 2186, the superintendents, the teachers in that school are now saying, not what if, but why not? And they have to stop tinkering with the idea of innovation and begin transforming their school. So removing the barriers of only allowing a ninth grader to have to be able to be at the capacity to earn high school credit. Why is that? Why do we say 15-year-olds? When you reach the magic age of 15 is when you can start to earn high school credit. So he is not encouraging early graduation, but he's having his 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that have been willing and have their parents willing participants participate in credit-bearing courses those 3 years of middle school, opening up those last 2 years of their high school experience to do internships, to do job shadowing, to do civics engagement, to do the capstone of real important connected life work, very much connected to competency-based, proficiency-based.
Yeah, and innovation can happen without federal law. I'll use the example in our state. The American Indian kids have narrowed the graduation gap tremendously. And part of the reason they did that is the school districts that they exist in have created extraordinarily culturally rich opportunities in those tribal nations.
Shouldn't that be happening anyway?
Oh, of course it does, and that's the issue. Of course it does, and it already happens locally. We don't need Madison or Washington to denote that. But yes, that should be happening locally. And it already does. That's my point. And we can unleash those things, as Kirsten said, with maybe relinquishing some control at the state level over rules and regulations. But indeed, it does happen, and we can make it happen even more so.
Claudio, I think, too, of the career readiness measures that both of these states have, but, allowing for students to get certificates and allowing them to move through the system is a huge part of giving students the pace in which they need to go and giving them a career pathway. So.
Evidence-based decision-making is cited at least 70 times by ESSA. But what happens when the most promising innovations, turn out to be too costly? This runs up it runs up against a wall when it comes to funding innovation. Am I right?
So I'm going to say evidence-based and funding, I think, go hand in hand. I don't know so much that it's about additional money, but it's about using evidence to prioritize your existing funding to going to the correct places.
But let me give you an example. Let's talk about standardized tests versus the portfolio, like Vermont has tried for many, many years. I mean, portfolios are a lot more expensive, both to grade, to evaluate, but presumably it captures a child's progress a lot better than a standardized test. Where does the money to support an alternative kind of assessment come from when it costs twice, 3 times more?
I'll say this, resources are an issue. There's no question about it. But I think whether they're the legislators sitting out here or the ones that I work in Madison or Senator Olson, who is representing us here today from Wisconsin, if what works has been proven, money will come from the state level.
You really think that?
Absolutely. I mean, in whole chunks of money, no, but in ways to specifically address achievement gaps, yes.
And, you know, one other issue I think that combines both this question of innovation and real, proven strategies is how this new law is focusing so much, surprisingly for me, on limited English-speaking children. This is the fastest, language minorities, the fastest growing student population in this country, especially Spanish-speaking. In your own experiences, your own communities, North Dakota, Wisconsin, have you found a way to not guarantee, but to make sure that these kids have equal access to the best possible schools and the best possible teachers?
No. No. In the state of Wisconsin, our ELL funding covers about 7%.
7%.
Yeah, of the cost of providing services for EL kids. So the answer to that question is no.
And I would say the same thing. I would hope that my answer is never yes, that we have found the best possible way, because that flies in the face of what I believe is continuous improvement. I hope that we're always on that quest to find a better way this year than we did it last year. But I would say I would have Tony's same answer. No, we haven't found that best way. There are over 110 different languages other than English spoken in our schools in the state of North Dakota. That's very surprising to many people, because many people really view North Dakota as a very homogeneous state. So, but are our school districts continually analyzing their instructional strategies, using our teacher evaluations to specifically target that? Yes, they are. But funding is an issue, and it is a challenge when we welcome these new Americans into our communities to really get not only their students, but their families assimilated into our communities as well.
And as a state, we need, as a nation, I think we need to think about those large chunks of money, not necessarily categorically, but general aid programs. They need to be democratized in a more serious way. They need to wait for English learners, students with disabilities, foster kids, and so on. We have a few states in the audience that have done that. But clearly, that is one of the answers to the problem.
How important is this to the Education Commission of the states? I'm assuming that you get calls asking, what are other states doing with this population that we can learn from?
Right. So I can't answer for ECS. Jeremy would probably be better at that. I can say that, we have deployed some experts to go into states. I think we are in 27 states now where we're talking about how the measurement of the English language population. And I think bright light and data is a huge lever in the way that we look at this. We've been measuring EL students for years, but it's been hidden in Title III, and now it is a part of the accountability system. Many states have brought it there, but it'll be a bigger highlight in accountability systems, and I think we'll have to be reckoned with a little more.
Let's talk politics for a second. Will states, do you think, play into the hands of the polarizing forces that have pitted ideologically driven reformers, proponents of markets, choice, competition, versus those who see these as threats to public schools and the public good? Are we headed, as happened with NCLB, are we headed for greater polarization and and infighting among us, educators, because we've not really resolved those differences.
I'm the wrong one to ask, so my answer will be short. We couldn't be any more polarized on that issue than in Wisconsin. We've had vouchers for 26 years, and the issues around vouchers haven't been resolved. But that doesn't stop us, either the public school system, the innovative public school system, and the voucher community, to continue to seek solutions that will close achievement gaps and to make sure that all kids achieve at high levels. But indeed, the politics of that this sucks the air out of the room, Claudio. I just ran for re-election in Wisconsin. And if I wasn't careful, I would spend every waking moment talking about vouchers as I was campaigning. I didn't want to do that, so I didn't. But that's where we have to kind of think through. We have to be for kids. We have to be for making sure that all kids learn at high levels. We shouldn't be spending all our time worrying about who's in charge, what adults are in charge, where the money's coming from, blah, blah, blah. I think there's better use of our time.
Tony said it well. My large fear, and I shared this with a few others this morning before the panel, my fear is that the conversation about school choice and which system is better than the other is really going to suck the air out of everything. And there's a lot going on in education right now. There's a lot going on for our students right now. There's a lot of opportunities, a lot of things going on in our world. And I worry that if we are focused too singularly on one particular issue that is part of policy, that we're going to miss something else that is critically important for us to be aware of, that we also need to be addressing.
You're saying that fight could very well trump, no pun intended, trump the broader discussion of what ESSA can do for states that they've not been able to do before.
If we let it.
Yeah.
And that is what leadership matters. If we let that be the singular issue, then it could. But we don't need to let that happen. There's a lot of conversation. And I would like for the conversation to be less about which school system or which leadership model yields better results, but how can we learn from each other? And I don't hear a lot of that going on.
Yeah, and it was intentional to have said Trump, by the way, being sneaky, because I want to jump into what happens. How does all this unfold under a Trump administration, again, given what we've heard thus far? And I have to say, we've not heard much, unless anybody else out here has had a direct line to the president. We've not, or Secretary DeVos, we've not heard much. Are you all getting guidance about any of this from the administration?
I would say not as much as we have in the past. I'm not sure it's not as much as we need. We're certainly, the two of us here, and of course Carissa representing all the chiefs, we're going forward. We're submitting state plans. We've got councils working. We're getting input. We're going to have good plans to submit in our case this fall. So yes, there's a little more cricket noise out of Washington, but I'm not sure if that's not a bad thing.
And North Dakota submitted their ESSA plan in the first round, and so we're waiting to hear what their feedback is. We've received, they're responsive when we've asked questions. They have provided answers. Our stakeholder group that has written our plan has adjusted based on that guidance. But at the beginning of the ESSA planning and writing, the state chiefs decided we are leaders. We're going to lead with our state. And I think my colleagues and I across the nation have done that. We've gone back to our states. We've led. We heard the message from Senator Alexander that this should be a plan based on our vision, our needs, and our state, and we were to go forth within the ESSA law and write that plan. So I feel like we're positioned, all of my colleagues and I are positioned well to be ready to do what we need to do for our states.
So, Claudio, I would just say that every administration has a different way of working, right? So, and this is, 6 months into this administration, and we're all still trying to figure out how to do the communication, but you saw the first 3 state plans came out, and there was some pretty substantial communication and feedback. And we're in that process now where the department has 120 days to review with the states their plans. And there's a lot of communication going back and forth with those 3 states. We're embarking on the next wave of the 17 that submitted their plans that will be getting some feedback, I think probably this week. And there is ongoing communication about that.
And I want to segue to that, and to wind this down, I want to see if we can sneak in a couple of questions. But what we know based on the independent review released by Bellwether and Ed Partners and the Collaborative for Student Success that came out this week is this: 16 states, District of Columbia, ESSA plans. And that evaluation said the states have submitted plans that look pretty good on the matters of evaluating schools, broadening accountability, but, and this is the word they used, they failed to offer detailed plans to make sure the performance of all students is counted, especially that of low-performing subgroups of students. So here's this kind of, good, bad thing. It's apparent that states have gotten their act together on evaluating schools, having the right metrics. But when it comes to actually a plan that has specific strategies to help the neediest kids, these states are falling short. I'm not going to single anyone out, but you all know that based on that report, New Mexico, Louisiana look pretty good. Bottom 2, Michigan, Massachusetts. I mean, the state that always gets praised for the quality of its public schools is, according to this evaluation, not doing well. Any thoughts? And does an evaluation like this by an outside group help?
I'll just say this, that not having read the report, but they sound like they're getting at the tail end, and that is, what do we do with these kids that are struggling? And I'm not surprised that there's some fluffiness in that we've determined that state and federal top-down solutions don't work. And so I'm guessing most of those state plans talked about locally crafted innovative strategies to close gaps, and the processes that local school districts are going to put in place. It just seems odd to me that the federal government would say, here, state and local school districts fix it, and then when they fix it according to what they feel is important, the federal government says it doesn't work. That seems incongruous to me.
Yeah.
I would say they do help. Obviously, anytime that you have feedback or critical feedback from experts, it's helpful. It allows you to sit back, analyze, see how you can make things stronger, see where you're already strong and you shouldn't deviate from. So anytime that we can receive feedback, I welcome that with open arms. It helps us on our journey at the state level for continuous improvement. With that, to address the specific issue that we haven't detailed a plan on how we're specifically going to address the needs of our neediest students, I would say we submitted a plan to the federal government. We were meeting what we needed to meet and understanding that this was a growth and this was a journey that we were going to take. We've dug into the data. We have very specific ideas. We have very strong and solid knowledge of where our neediest students are, what their specific needs are based on student surveys. We have very specific plans on how we're going to work with each of those districts that we anticipate. That wasn't necessarily required in the plan, nor did we put it in the plan. So I think it was a cursory review of what was submitted.
So, Claudia, I just have to add that I think feedback is great, and I think all of our states welcome that. I think it's very important. But a key part of this law was stakeholder engagement in your state. And I just want to give a shout out to Tony Smith, who I think is here, 94 face-to-face meetings on his listening tours. And that's just one example of the many states that have gone out and gotten huge feedback from their stakeholders and built a plan that works for their state. So in that regard, it's one voice. It's helpful. We should look for all the liabilities we have, but it's also about building a plan that works for your stakeholders.
And that was my point about, in my presentation, about how the scrutiny is going to increase precisely because of this new opening, perhaps, for stakeholders to have a voice.
That's right.
But I'm saying that the greatest pressure is going to start coming actually from parents and civil rights groups who are looking at all this and saying, you know, what are we going to get out of this? Because the history has told us that we don't ever or seldom are consulted. I have time for a question or two, barely. I hope we didn't put anybody to sleep. There's a hand right there. And just a question, please, because we don't have much time. Tell us who you are.
Mark Elgar.
Good morning, Mark Elgar, Advance Ed. Kirsten and Tony, congratulations on re-election. My question is, in your development of your plan that you submitted, were there any innovations that your state thought of that did not get into the plan that you would hope to introduce in the next 5 years?
Our plan has not yet been submitted, but we believe that in the end of the day, one of the things that we feel real confident about is creating opportunities. This sounds a little fluffy, so bear with me. Kind of ombudsman that can serve as a go-between local school districts and communities that are struggling within our urban areas and our rural areas. Sometimes it's just hard for parents to navigate the system. And we feel if we can empower parents locally and empower parents kind of outside of the school organization, we're going to be better off for it.
So in North Dakota, there were just a couple things that we did add into our Choice Ready and our effective teaching strategies versus ineffective teachers. Those were two things, but our focus on continuous improvement, which is a main pillar that we work with Advance Ed through to have continuous improvement for all of our schools, that is what we are hoping will reveal the innovative opportunities that are going on in our schools that we can eventually add into our plan as we continue to evolve.
More questions out there? There's, let's go, okay, there's a microphone there. We'll come back here in a minute.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Gurule Leyva. I'm the 2017 New Mexico Teacher of the Year. Thank you. It's not really a question, it's more of an open invitation. I'm a biomedical science teacher in a 5-course pathway at Capitol High School in Santa Fe. We also focus on 4th through 8th graders in a STEAM H summer enrichment program. We also have community partnerships with our hospital and other healthcare providers with mentorship, scholarship program, and such. So I am inviting you all, if you want to see innovative education, we're not perfect, but we are awesome. I am inviting you all to come to Capitol High School in Santa Fe and take a look at what we have. We are a 100% free meal program, 1,500 students, and we service over 240 kids annually as well as 800 kids in the summer. So.
By the way, were you surprised that New Mexico looked so good or favorably in this bellwether evaluation, considering that New Mexico hasn't exactly had a good reputation on NAEP or any other metric to measure student performance?
I think what a lot of people misunderstand is New Mexico, even though we're a large state, we're very rural, and we deal with a very huge English language learning population. But innovative education, I think, is the key. 95% of my students are English language learners. 98% of my students are Latino.
So it boils down to innovation, is what you're saying. And
Public school innovation.
Public school innovation.
It happens.
right, thank you.
Congratulations.
Question here.
Oh, okay, so I'm sorry. Okay, good morning. I'm Gloria Pereira Robertson, and I'm the Oregon State Teacher of the Year. I am a second language learner. I am a daughter of immigrant parents, and my question to the panel is, as a minority teacher, I have confronted on a yearly basis discrimination in my amongst parents, students, and staff. And now I'm asked to recruit minority teachers to our state. and there is no support for minority teachers. And I'm asking you, are you in your states figuring out how to support minority teachers when they face those things in their classroom, in their staff meetings, or in professional development? Because it makes it very hard for people like myself to be in the school system that doesn't seem to have a way of supporting us.
North Dakota does support through its legislative process a teacher support system for teachers that are within their first 5 years, and they've generously supported again in this next upcoming biennium. We have specific strands within that teacher support system that do support our minority teachers and allow them to meet separately and address their specific issues, but simply put, we are not doing enough.
Yeah, and it's so sad to hear stories like that because it's so difficult to recruit teachers of color in our state, and I think every state. I know our urban areas in Wisconsin have worked hard to create opportunities outside of schools for teachers of color to work with each other, to recreate with each other, making sure that they have partners and colleagues within the schools to help them work through those problems so that the one African-American fifth grade teacher in an elementary school isn't the person that all the African-American boys are sent to be disciplined. We can't have our teachers of color be working 2 or 3 jobs at the same time.
This raises a bigger question, coming back to ESSA, which many have complained about. Will we totally abandon the goal of raising teacher quality? Will states commit to improve teacher quality and work with teachers unions to create rigorous but fair ways to evaluate teachers? Is this now up to every individual state to make sure that they have qualified teachers, or is it missing from ESSA, really?
I believe our requirements were higher than what the federal government ever required anyway. So that is less of an issue than the teacher shortage, and the teacher shortage that drives the political dialogue around we're going to solve the teacher shortage by dumbing down the profession. That is more of a concern of mine. I believe we have high quality preparation institutions. I think we'll continue to do that, but it's the shortage of the teachers that concerns me.
So this is an important piece for our North Dakota plan and for North Dakota. As with Tony in Wisconsin, our teacher licensing requirements were higher than necessary under NCLB for highly qualified. That's not changing. We made some minor adjustments this last legislative session, but nothing significant. With that being said, the highly effective teacher requirement in ESSA, that was a major discussion among our stakeholder groups, and a specific subcommittee of our stakeholders from across the state worked separately just to answer this question. And I think it's significantly important that North Dakota chose to focus on highly effective teaching strategies and aggregate that up to determine whether our students of color and students of poverty were being taught by teachers that had a larger amount of highly effective teaching strategies on their evaluation system. North Dakota allows 3 different evaluation systems, one of those 3, and they're reported through our advanced ed process every year. If we are just going to focus on identifying highly effective or ineffective teachers, what does that do for improvement? That shame, that blaming, that public shaming is not going to get us anywhere versus focusing on how many effective teaching strategies are occurring in that school building, in that school district. What are the ineffective strategies? How can we identify those and then allocate our resources in order to help that teacher, help that school building get better? Identifying ineffective teachers does nothing but blame and is nothing but punishment. When we focus on identifying the strategies that are effective and ineffective in a school district, then you begin to talk about an overall systemic way to improve our teaching and learning.
Carissa, one of the really tough questions, though, is evaluating teachers. And you and I know that, this whole business of we're using test scores as a large percentage of that evaluation, whether it's 25, 30, 40, or even 50%, that's what gets caught up or gets us all so riled up, certainly the unions. Is there a path to a reasonable evaluation policy? Are there examples out there of someone who's doing it right?
So I don't know that I can come up with an example off the top of my head, but there are a number of states who have looked at what they've done on the teacher evaluation, and under the waiver system, you know, it's kind of like a pendulum. It swung pretty far to the percentages that were in there for the evaluation system, and we've seen states right-sizing that. After any kind of program that you have in place, you should take a year or two and look at it and say, look, is there something that we can be doing differently? And I think we've seen that in the evaluation systems. I think we've also seen evaluation systems be very taking hold because of what Kirsten just said, which is providing the support and assistance rather than just labeling. So matching that with the kinds of resources that teachers need in order to be better performing.
Well, the clock says we've run out of time. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, panelists. And if you have more questions for them, you can approach them individually. Jeremy, we're done.
All right.